All right, welcome everybody once again. Let's get rolling. First order of business, let's approve the minutes to our February 5th meeting. Does anybody have any objections to the minutes? Okay, hearing none, I'd like to make motion to approve by Brubaker, second by Golis. All in favor? Unanimous, thank you very much. All right, before we get started on the rest of the agenda, I just wanted to make another announcement. I know I mentioned it in the last two meetings, but for the benefit of the public, our viewing audience, both in Radnor and globally, we do have one vacancy available on our board. To be fair, it's an exciting time to be here. We're updating our comprehensive land use plan. We're in the middle of that revision. That's a strategic document that serves as the guideline for our development, what goes on in the township for the next 10 years. Also, as a result of the comprehensive land use plan revision, there will also be some ordinance updates that come out of that. So as a planning commissioner, if you choose to join us, you would be entitled to have an advisory role in all of those areas. So if you're interested in serving, please reach out to Bill White's office, Peggy Hagan, and she will shepherd you through the process of possibly getting appointed. That being said, I'd like to invite the public to speak prior to the two items that we have on our agenda. If you have anything to say that is not related to the two items that we're about to hear tonight. Hearing none. First, let's delve into the sewage facilities planning module. This is for Cornerstone Bistro, 1 West Ave. The applicant is renovating the second floor office space to add 60 seats for the restaurant located on the first floor of the building. So I suppose the 60 seats are going to be on the second floor. This item is perfunctory. The Planning Commission chair has to sign off on the sewage planning module. The only thing that's required from the rest of the commission is to vote to allow me to do that. So I'm going to make a motion in the matter of Cornerstone Bistro, 1 West Ave. I'd like to make a motion for the Planning Commission to allow me to sign off on the Municipal Planning Agency review of the sewage facilities planning module. Second. All right, second by Kunda. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, unanimous. I will execute that document on behalf of the Planning Commission. All right, second item, land development application 209755, 26 Wentworth Lane. So just to lead into this item, please come up. The applicant was last in front of us on August 7th, 2023, when we voted to table. We've obviously seen this application in a variety of formats over the last couple of years. We are considering this application de novo. So please introduce yourself. And
good evening. My name is Tim Davis, here from Shock Group Engineering, presenting on behalf of the client at 26 Wentworth. This project, as mentioned, was previously in front of the Planning Commission last summer, 2023, at which time the applicant chose to table the application pursuant to feedback from the Planning Commission as well as concerns from the Township. During that time, our team took the opportunity to respond to some of the Township consultants' review letters, as well as incorporate the verbal feedback from the Commission. To review, the project is located at 26 Wentworth Avenue in Garrett Hill. The Garrett Hill neighborhood of Radnor Township, however, is not within the Garrett Hill zoning overlay district. The project proposes to subdivide the current lot into 2 residential lots as seen on the plan. The subdivision will create 2 approximately 7,500 square foot lots that are 50 foot wide, which is both larger and wider than the surrounding lots on Wentworth Avenue. The houses meet the requirements for the zoning R5 district, as well as the parking requirement as previously discussed. We are providing one in-garage parking space and one off-street parking space that is fully within the buildable envelope of the lot that is in front of the garage. The applicant has agreed to implement the township consultant's review letters in their entirety. Applicant also followed the non-obligatory recommendation for street lighting that was in the consultant's review letter. We have also provided street trees. However, due to the driveway and utility spacing, we do not meet the 30-foot required separation. They are at 35 foot, so we are still seeking a waiver from that section because we do not meet the 30-foot separation for it. As part of this revision, the applicant has revised the stormwater system to incorporate two separate on-lot stormwater management facilities. These facilities handle up to the 100-year storm in a recharge condition. As part of the applicant's consultant's letter, both lots have a blanket stormwater easement over it. That is a review. Any questions from the Planning Commission?
Sure. So you're asking for 5 waivers. I do have a question on the 5th waiver. This is the street trees at an interval greater than 30 feet. Have you been in front of Shade Tree yet?
No.
Not, okay. Are you on the docket for the next Shade Tree meeting?
Yes, we just confirmed that.
Okay. So my concern is, with anything that we do tonight, I don't want to bind Shade Tree. To be fair, I don't know if I've personally studied the landscape plan. We see the trees mapped out, but we have another agency to review that. So
Yeah, and we're just as happy to see it, even if it's not approved by planning, because we have our own business. So
exactly. Okay. Okay. Commissioner comment?
I had one question about the stormwater. You
Yes.
say that it's, the stormwater retention basins are designed to absorb a 100-year storm,
Correct.
and then that's why you don't have an outlet facility on each one?
That's correct.
What happens if we have a 500-year storm?
In that case, the stormwater inlets that collect it are designed so that the inlets would just infiltrate as much as they can, at which point it would flow off-site in a non-concentrated manner where the rain falls.
And not into the new homeowners' basements, right?
Correct.
Or anyone else's?
Correct. As the topography currently is, it's a pretty flat site. If it was over a 100-year storm, there's actually additional capacity. We are not maximizing these. While I cannot say with certainty, I think they would probably handle up to about the 500-year storm. However, we are getting more and more of those. The design is handled so that it does not redirect stormwater away from its natural flow patterns. So it would capture up to the requirement of the 100-year storm during that much larger storm. And then from there, once this system is inundated to its required capacity, it would then just flow overland as if the inlets weren't there, as it's infiltrating the whole time during the storm.
Any other comments?
yeah, I have a follow-up question on the stormwater. Steve, we see developments where the folks say, we're keeping all the stormwater, we're holding it all. We're not going to put anything off this property. This isn't the case here, obviously, because remember South Wayne parking? That was that a 100-year storm? After you guys did the water remediation there?
So every stormwater system has a finite capacity. That storm there was twice the capacity of that system at that time. And at that point, the system's full, the inlets are full, the pipes are full, so it acts as it did before.
So I guess what I'm trying to get at, not very well, but I'm trying to get at is, this sounds like the applicant's trying to do due diligence in terms of a big storm. And it's probably an improvement over what exists now on that property. I think I read that it was like 43% better in terms of handling stormwater. But, so that's all. I mean, the township puts in a system, as you said, it got overrun. This could happen here too. And so I guess I'm just thinking that it's better than it was.
So there were no controls previously, and so now there are controls. But I do have a question, sir, if I may ask the applicant. The property, the former retail that was there, runoff would come from that parking lot, and it would pond on the northern side. I noticed that when we've been there, during storms, and even not when there was just hoses running, but it would pond on the new property. In the area, it's very blurry over here, but in between those two trees, more or less, on the north side or northeast side.
Mr. Norsini, you're referring to the retail that's adjoining the property.
Correct. So top of page, come down to the right. Come down to your right. Further. So somewhere in there, runoff from that parking lot would just sit on that property. And obviously, we don't want people to buy new homes and have this ponding. Is that addressed in your grading?
Yes, it is. So there is an inlet that grading has a swale directing it to.
Can you show us that with the proposed contours?
So the grading is less than the contour interval. We can provide additional detailing with spot shots. As it currently stands, the finished floor of the property is 423 at the house, and that inlet is at 420. So the inlet sits 3 feet below the finished floor.
Okay, finished floor of house, but I don't know how that relates to the adjacent parking lot, lands of Spicy Brick, number 912 Conestoga Road.
It's about an 8-inch fall from the property line to that inlet. And then it goes back up to the driveway that leads up to the garage.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Commissioner Kim.
I have a question regarding urban design character. I believe I made this comment last time around regarding the street wall. So Garrett Hill has a certain character. Houses are dense, close together. This street in particular has a very distinct street wall. It looks like you're not going to abide by that street wall. Is there any consideration to change the design of the site plan to align with the street wall of Wentworth?
I do not know the applicant's position on that. I know the applicant went through several design iterations. We were not part of that. So I cannot speak to the applicant's flexibility on that end.
Okay, thank you. The other question I have is regarding walkability. This is a very odd street with what looks like
It's a 24.5-foot wide cartway.
yeah, I understand, but your neighbors have driveways that are parallel to the street.
Correct. The neighboring properties, for the most part, have paved into their lot to provide parking parallel with the street, but off of the narrow street.
So how do sort of parents with strollers, people in wheelchairs who want to walk to go eat at a restaurant navigate your side of the street?
Effectively, they would have to cross the street to the sidewalk that's over there. Because of the existing conditions, as you mentioned, along that whole length of Wentworth Avenue on our side, there is no viable way for someone with that, in that situation to traverse it safely. So because of that, we are not able to tie into anything in there, and equally, you would need to acquire additional right-of-way from each property to put in a sidewalk.
Okay. Okay. That's it. Thank you.
Any other commissioner comment? So we have some further questions regarding your setbacks. If you could, just wanted to note, Chapter 225-27C1, Solicitor, do you care to comment on where we are in setbacks according to this plan?
Yeah, just looking at the plan, it appears you're asking for a waiver to the 60-foot right-of-way.
Yes.
And then you're measuring your front yard setback from the 33-foot existing right-of-way, not the 60-foot alternate right-of-way.
Correct.
And kind of going off of the comment earlier, that allows you to move the house probably 10 feet closer to the road than all the other houses on that side of the street. So I think that's a concern here, at least in my experience. When someone gets a waiver to the right-of-way, they're still usually measuring the front yard from the ultimate, not the existing. And you seem to be kind of taking advantage of that waiver here to put a bigger house on the lot than everyone else has been allowed to. And also, how tall is this house going to be?
I'm not sure of the exact height off the top of my head. I know it conforms with the 35-foot height.
Is it going to be 2 or 3 stories?
I do not recall off the top of my head.
Are you going to have a flat roof or a peaked roof?
I do not recall.
Don't want this to be like a hearing, but just curious.
We're not on trial here.
Yeah,
right?
we're not. But yeah, I think it's, certainly a concern here that it's going to be a much larger house than building than anyone else on this street. It's going to be much taller, and then you're almost compounding that impact by bringing it even closer to the street. So I think that's one of the concerns here. And like I said, you're almost kind of taking advantage. You're getting the waiver, which, is understandable why you asked for it, why you want it, but it seems to, you're piling on there. So, certainly if the Planning Commission is in support of this or agrees that maybe, it would be better for this building to be moved back to be in line with all the others, my recommendation would be that this waiver to the road right-of-way be conditioned upon you shifting the building back so you do meet that building line of all the other buildings on the street.
Yeah. We are not pushing the house all the way up to that front property line.
Yeah, I recognize, yeah, you're about 4 or 5 feet back off the front property line, but you're still, the second floor overhang definitely is, I would say, probably 10 feet closer to the road than any of the other houses.
Yes, and one of the other considerations that we're considering as part of that is the impervious cover of extending the driveways further back as well, where we were able to shift it up at a place where it kind of balanced, where we weren't all the way up on it, but we pushed it back as far as we could with the driveway impervious, as we have on the site now.
Can you push the house back without affecting the stormwater situation?
No, it would increase the impervious on site, which we would be able to collect. However, it would generate more stormwater by the longer driveway, which again is not insurmountable. These systems are only about 60% full at the 100-year storm. We left ample capacity in these systems, so we can control it. However, our zoning would be hindered by that, as well as the actual systems themselves. What would likely happen is we'd have to take another look at those trees. We are constrained by several other utilities on the site. We can't push the house any further back due to a sanitary easement on Lot 1. So we're constrained by that as well. And we pretty much pushed it to where it's only a foot off of that easement, so we can't shift Lot 1 back any further. I guess we could shift it a foot back, but we'd be right on the sanitary easement.
Before we go much further, I'd like to, we're not going to take a vote on this, but I'd like to get the temperature of the Planning Commission in asking our applicant to maintain the building line congruent with the neighborhood. And my sense of this is that this particular development will
If I could just ask a question. If it cannot be pushed back any further, are you suggesting then that it be reduced in size?
Well, that would certainly be one of the alternatives.
It would likely get closer to the neighboring house if we pushed it wider. We would make the house wider. We did attempt to keep the house off the neighboring houses as much as possible to give room between this development and the existing houses. Also, the thought was by keeping it, kind of splitting the difference with keeping it off the front setback line, as the houses along that street got developed and potentially could move up to their allowed front yard setback, that it would be more in line with future development, but that was just an internal discussion that we had.
Sure, and I think if the other homes were to undertake future development, as you say, they would also need to seek waivers.
I do not believe so.
From a shade tree perspective, these trees are, this property and this tree situation is more extreme in terms of keeping the trees, not losing the trees. So I know the Shade Tree Commission would feel, they would feel like compromised if you had to do something if you had to remove the trees in order to make the project work. Just because those trees are actually, they're serving several purposes on a property like this. So I can just tell you that's going to be a hard one. I mean, I think the answer is reduce the size of the house.
Well, I don't want to dive too deep into shade trees business, but are any of the trees on the property heritage trees?
I do not believe so. I believe the largest tree is in the 15-inch range. I do not know off the top of my head.
It's just a matter of, those trees are actually helping remediate stormwater. So when you remove those, that's going to be an X factor that you're not going to be able to know what the ramifications are until you remove them.
Understood, yeah. We are proposing to keep, by placing the houses where they are, it allows us to move the stormwater up and keep them out of the root systems of those trees. So that was part of the design consideration from an engineering standpoint.
Any other comments on this particular subject?
Well, I have a question. I don't know if you get the answer, but I hear all this about it being much larger, but what are we talking about? I mean, what are the square foot of the existing houses versus what this is in terms of the impact or the change?
I think the concern is height. And it's by right. I mean, code allows up to 35 feet there. None of the homes appear to be that tall.
The house is about 1,300 square foot footprint on the first floor, and the second floor is about 1,500.
Assuming that there are 2 stories. That's the assumption.
Correct.
Because
Hey,
earlier-
Tim, can you move your plan, page 3, the aerial? Maybe that will help people visualize this. If we can maybe pull in a little closer on that?
Tim, if you could put your finger where the dot is so Ian can zoom. Thank you.
That's good. So I think you can see the size of the building they're proposing and then the houses to the left.
And is it across the street, they look like, are they twins or brothers? I'm trying to get a feel from Google Maps, but it's hard to tell.
They are twins, and we are proposing a twin as well.
Right, but the one, it looks like the ones next to you are singles? Correct.
Correct.
Okay.
I think from an aesthetically, I'm not as concerned about like the building height once you, because you're right next to, some commercial space. My concern is from your abutting some restaurant retail, you have some trash right behind the lot. I guess it has nothing to do with zoning or from a compliance standpoint. I'm just looking at basically from a practical standpoint. And the other thought I have is that what happens if I forget what the use is. It's a flower store or the store, the building that's right next to it on Conestoga Road. I'm not sure. I think it's vacant right now.
Yeah, it's a former garden center.
The former garden center. So what happens if that gets redeveloped, that space? How does that fall in line with what you're looking to develop here? How does that look aesthetically, or as well as what are the implications on either stormwater as well?
Yeah, so that property is fully paved from a stormwater perspective. It couldn't get any worse. So we are handling it, as part of this design. As far as aesthetics, we are proposing to keep the existing green buffer that's there with the trees, as well as in the future, long-term additional plantings or fencing could be proposed to enhance that. We are not proposing that. We're proposing to keep the existing trees as they are.
So my concern, and I do want to restate it, is that as we walk this neighborhood, this particular, and the height is by right. Our code allows for it. So that's not a concern. And of course, the appearance of the structure is definitely going to be different. But the building line is that this development creates is unfavorable to certainly the adjoining property. It may create some issues with sight lines and visibility in terms of them pulling out of their driveway. But really, it wouldn't conform to the look and feel of the neighborhood. And I think that's certainly my concern.
We did try to keep the Lot 1 building as far from that property as we could. So we are far exceeding the required side yard setbacks for there, which should alleviate the view sight lines. If we had made it wider and bring it in closer, that would have a similar effect, but I understand where you're coming from.
So I guess what would be the problem if you were to go to the limits on the side yard setbacks and actually maintain the building line?
There'd be no issues. I think the applicant wanted to preserve a side yard for the applicant's use since there are utilities in the backyard. I think they wanted to preserve space between the existing neighbor and the proposed house as a sellable feature, is my understanding.
Would you, if you were to choose that route, would you be losing any square footage in the homes? Can you speculate?
I could speculate, probably not. You could maximize it to be where it is. There is some stormwater challenges. We're trying to create some breadth there. We have a very shallow swale that goes through there, where we didn't want to exacerbate that by pushing the house any closer to the property line, which is why we went to the twin model, modeled after the houses across the street. But is it possible? Yes. But this was the design the applicant chose.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. I do have a follow-up on parking. Solicitor, you had mentioned, so there's 2 required parking spots per residence here. You had a comment on parking?
Yeah, in the past, where we've had one of the parking requirements met, within a garage, we have a recorded declaration that says that that space has to remain available for parking. You can't convert it into anything else, just to make sure, especially in this area where parking is such a premium, that both cars are being parked on the lot and not somewhere else. So that would be, once again, another suggestion that any approval be conditioned upon that such a declaration be placed on the two garages being proposed.
Yeah, the applicant has indicated he's amenable to that.
Okay.
All right, fair enough. Any other commissioner comment? All right. How about, let's hear from staff. Mr. Phillips.
I think you pretty much covered everything that I had in my letter. There are some stormwater comments on here that are just housekeeping comments that certainly can be addressed. I have no concerns over that.
Okay, and just for the record, you will comply to every other comments except for, obviously, the waivers
Yes.
that you're seeking. Okay, very good. Mr. Drummond.
You guys kind of covered some of the things that we had regarding right-of-way and cartway width previously. We had a couple of minor comments that were basically cleanup comments for the plans, but other than that, we don't have anything else for this
Okay, thank you.
project.
Very well. Mr. Norsini, one final pass?
I had my one comment, sir, thank you.
Okay. All right, let's hear from the public.
Sarah Pilling, 29 Garrett Avenue. In my observation as a resident of Garrett Hill for 42 years. I've watched this lot since first the township was going to buy it, turn it into a parking lot, and then the first building set of plans and this. I don't know whether all of you realize that the reason the houses south of this development are set back the way they are is there were two roads. There was Wentworth Lane and there was Summit. So that's why they're set back. And there seems to be some confusion that came up when the township was talking about buying it from those neighbors who Wentworth was a private lane and they weren't quite sure when it suddenly got made into a public road. And the other issue that came up that night was a great deal of water runoff from that lot through those backyards of these houses on Summit. So these are the guys, see, this is where was Wentworth Lane. And they've got all of this, and this runs down into here. And there was money allocated at a commissioners meeting to do a stormwater study of those backyards. And photographs were taken, which were given to Steve Norsini, showing the kind of flooding that went through there. Actually, what happens is it runs down behind these houses. This is Williams. It runs through the yards at Williams, and often the east side of Williams is flooded. You can't walk on the sidewalk, and you can't walk in the street. So there's water that's constantly flowing downhill. It eventually gets to Macrone, where they supposedly built those rain gardens that they affectionately call ponds. There is a serious water problem there. And I know that some of the neighbors who live on Wentworth were very concerned about the amount of water. There was only one resident who was willing to carry it further. The rest of them went, oh, well, nobody's ever going to do anything. So you should just know that the water does flow there. And this issue of these houses on Wentworth that are set back because that was a private lane, and they're not going to come forward, and that's why you've got this problem where it's wider here and then it comes up and becomes a narrower street. And historically, I think you need to know what the people on this street are dealing with. It is also no longer a little country lane. It is a cut through. If they come down, not Conestoga, they come down 320, and they cut through Clyde, and they come up through Garrett Hill, and they don't want to hit the traffic light at Williams and Conestoga, so they come around and they head out Summit, Wentworth, whatever you want to call it, to take a right to go down on Conestoga Road. So it is not a not trafficked road. The traffic patterns have changed dramatically in the last couple of years. So I just wanted to bring up those issues. One, why they're so set back, and B, there is a real water problem running downhill that impacts Williams. Most of those people have done some swale work, because I know Janine Bostic was getting water in her basement, and someone came in and created a swale, so now it runs down her driveway to Williams. So there is a serious water situation. We may be Garrett Hill, but we still have our water problems. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr.
Ms.
Chairman, just to add on to what Ms. Billing said, so Wentworth Lane still is a private lane, right? It's not public, that is still private. And we did complete our drainage study, which we'll be sharing with the residents in a little bit of time.
All right, thank you for that. All right, additional public comment? Okay. Just a quick question for the solicitor, if I may. With respect to preserving the garage parking in perpetuity, are you recommending a deed restriction? That's the cure for that?
Usually, we could do a deed restriction, or you can do what's called a declaration of covenants. Is a covenant that's placed on it that says that the garage must be kept available for parking and not converted into something else.
Okay.
Either one works. It has to be a document that's recorded, so it travels with the property, not personal to the current owner.
Got it.
I have one last question. In earlier meetings about this property, there were concerns about adjudication going on around the deed. Is that still happening, or was?
No, it has not. Actually, I got today a precipice to settle, discontinue, and end that particular court case, so that is no longer a worry.
All right, thanks for clarifying that. Any additional comments, questions? All right, I'm going to attempt to craft a motion to approve. So in the matter of land development application 209-755, 26 Wentworth Lane, I'd like to make a motion to approve, to recommend approval, subject to a 25-foot setback for the 60-foot right-of-way, to the 60-foot right-of-way, as well as declaration of covenants preserving the garage parking in perpetuity, as well as subject to the decision of Shade Tree Commission on to provide street trees, as well as tree removal and compensation. Can I get a second? Second by Nat. All those in favor? Okay, opposed?
You're different than the waivers they're requesting, the required setback? You lost me, that's on your conditions on this.
So I'm recommending, thank you for asking, Commissioner Brubaker. So I am recommending that they can maintain the existing right-of-way, but of 33 feet, but the setback begins at 60. That's my recommendation in my motion.
Okay, 'cause I thought you had said 25 feet, and I was trying to match that up with,
Yeah, thank you for that clarification.
okay.
So, all those in favor? Okay, and it's unanimous. Okay, thank you. Good luck. All right. Second item of the evening, a land development application 210133, 579 Lancaster Ave, AKA Radnor Hotel. The applicant is proposing to remove existing impervious surfaces and construct new structures on the property. So the applicant has been in front of us before on October 2nd, 2023, when we voted to table. And I guess the applicant is asking for 3 waivers. If you don't mind, walk us through the application again, and let's discuss the 3 waivers that you're asking
Yes.
for.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I'm here with Dave Porter and Dom Scrivano from Herbert McCombie's office.
And your name, sir?
My name is Joseph Birch.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Birch.
I work with SW Bages Limited, and we own the Radnor Hotel property. This is the property here. I also have it on the screen. Is it possible to switch to the computer screen? Oh, there we go. Here you have the Radnor Hotel. It's kind of a U-shaped building in the center there. It's open to the back to where it opens up to the Radnor Financial Center. They have another retail building in the front here. The mainline health building is a little further behind. We're kind of bordered by 2 primary roads, Lancaster Avenue to the south here, and Radnor Chester Road to the east. Just to our west is the 555 building. Across the street is St. David's Square and Micro Center. There's another office building on the corner here that's, I believe, the Kania family owns. And then the Radnor Radnor High School is to the east. So we're truly a standalone, mixed-use property here. We don't rely, like on the township, for any additional parking or renting parking the way it is now. We have a lot of different uses on our property. I would almost say we're probably one of the most diverse, use-wise properties in the township for everything that's there. So this is the south elevation. This is where you see the hotel and the 595 building we added, I want to say about 2004. This is the west elevation. If you were looking from the 555 building, you just really see multiple floors of the hotel. This is the back. This is the north side. Behind those pine trees are the area that we're proposing to make our changes. Here's another picture a little further back on the Radnor Financial and their main driveway. You can kind of see that you don't really see our property. I understand it's in the summertime, but really a lot of those trees and in the distance, you don't see what we're proposing. This goes back to the one prior. In the far right, you can kind of see the 3rd floor of the hotel building. It's kind of right up here. That's about 35 feet above that back courtyard. The tent that we're proposing, the height of it is 25 feet, so I'm not even sure if you would see the top of the tent. But kind of the point of all this is that the area that we're proposing to work, this is from the east. Looking from Radnor Chester Road, you see the most of the 595 building and the Vibe Urgent Care. You can just about see the hotel in the distance that I just pointed out before. And then as you're turning onto the property from the driveway to the Radnor Financial Center, this is what you see again, mostly pine trees. You do see the 555 building in the distance, but our proposed would be back in this area. So what we're looking to do in the area that we're looking to work in is really not visible from any of the adjacent properties. The hotel property itself, it's a little bit older, and people now are looking for a unique location for their events. Everyone wants an experience. For the past year and a half, we've been working with Fearless Restaurants on coming up with a concept, and they are going to take over the food and beverage operations at the Radnor Hotel. So the hotel is no longer be operating this, it'll be Fearless. I think their restaurants are pretty unique and offer a unique experience when you're inside them. We also own the Wayne Hotel, and I think they did a pretty good job creating a different atmosphere that we haven't seen in Wayne with Rosalie. And I think it's been a pretty good partnership, and so we're hoping that they can replicate that at the Radnor Hotel. Here's some pictures of the formal gardens. This is where we're proposing to make some changes. This was probably either a cocktail hour or a reception. We've had quite a many of these over the years. You can see our formal gardens. They'll come back. Here's another kind of outdoor facility operation here. This is another one where we had to put up several tents, probably due to the heat, allow some shade for some people to keep maybe food not getting scorched by the sun and people working. And here's an example of an outdoor wedding function. So we've had these all in the past, and this is something that I think a lot of people have liked over the years, but it's time for something new. And this is the veranda that when you come out of the banquets, you can either go down a ADA walkway or down the steps here. So these are kind of the functions that we have and what we're looking to propose, just a few changes to enhance that experience back there. This is kind of a concept drawing of what we're looking to do. This structure here, in our application, we call it a conservatory, but I would actually call it more of an arbor or like a pergola. I had given you this picture last time that I don't think really gave it too much justice, but the roof retracts. These panels can fall down or slide down to keep that open atmosphere. I think that's really what we're looking for. But in, I would say, mild inclement weather, it can go up and provide a protected area. And it was kind of interesting because I actually found one of these in our township already at La Scala Fire. I don't know if anyone's been there. This kind of walks in on it a little bit more. The structure itself has its own little stormwater gutter system. And what happens is that roof can actually rotate. As I get closer, you can see where these have turned, and then they actually collapse to one side. So you could have a clear roof opening of, I'd probably say, 2/3 to 3/4 of that would be open. That kind of compresses to one side. Unfortunately, I couldn't find anyone at La Scala to show me how to do that. It was just sitting that way at the time. But that's what we're, for one structure there. The thought was that could be a ceremony function if it works that way. I think if it was if you had a lightning storm, I don't know if you'd want to be in an all-metal structure on the outside, so it would probably fall back to inside. But if you're lucky enough to have your wedding on a great day, from there, you'd come out to this outdoor courtyard. There, we're proposing to have a permanent bar set up. Right now, we have to run outside temporary bar setups, tubs, ice, water, everything you need to operate a bar. There's a fireplace just for, I guess, ambiance. And then the next thing that we're proposing is a tent. This is a temporary structure. And what we're looking to do is, it's called a Sperry tent. It's made of a sailcloth. It's a little bit different than what we're probably used to coming out of COVID with the white vinyl tents that we see everywhere. This is another picture you can see at night. It does it can, I don't want to say it glows, but it has a different feel to it. When you're inside of it, this is more of an evening picture. There's no structure. It's really, it has wooden posts. There's wooden posts around the outside. It doesn't feel, it has a little bit flair to it as opposed to a metal structure. This is a daytime picture. You can see where it filtrates light a little bit better. And to give you an idea, this is what I think most of us are kind of used to now. One of these is similar setup at the Willows. During the summertime, they hold events there. But when you're inside, you do need to add light. I think most of the times it doesn't allow that light penetration as much as the other one that we're proposing. But overall, I think it's a nicer feel of what we're looking to do. The tent that we're proposing is roughly 46 by 84. It would hold about 200 people. The last thing in our application for the added building area, we proposed an addition to this small, what used to be the pool house building in the back here. This is more for staging and storage as they're servicing the tent area. So they just store stuff so that they're not bringing cups and plates through the whole entire place. This is where they would kind of bring stuff out and run your event. Now, we expect that these new facilities, we can provide better, more unique experiences for future weddings, cocktail receptions, bar mitzvahs, or any other gatherings. I'm going to try and center this as much as... For the purposes of the application and the change in the garden area, the parking analysis, I've simplified it a lot. I think on the last application, I had changes to, there's also, in this whole entire project, there'll be changes to the restaurant, different exiting and things like that. So I think the previous parking schedule was a little cumbersome, and this is to simplify it a lot more. The hotel, now 173 rooms, shows the 173 parking spaces for it. It goes through, Glen Morgan right now has 135 seats, the banquet rooms, the retail space, the office space, and the pad site. As I said before, we have a lot of uses on this site. All that adds up to 352 parking spaces, and we have 386 on site. So we have an extra 34 spaces now. In the proposal, what I'm showing is for the courtyard conservatory, it's about 1,800 square feet, but if you take 80% of that, it really requires 5 spaces. And to understand this, whatever happens in that courtyard, we have to reserve the banquet facilities as a fallback. Everything outside is weather dependent. Everyone wants to have a perfect day, but if there's thunderstorms or rain or something like that, all those functions have to come into the banquet facility, which they can accommodate there. So that's why this only shows this change for the necessary parking. Because while this is going on, there's nothing going on in the banquet facility, because it needs to be held in reserve in case something happens. Excuse me. The last time I was here, when I watched the meeting on the videotape to remember what happened, I noticed that the previous application went through the company's history with the township. And I thought it was important to kind of bring that up here as well. S.W. Bages has been operating in the township since 1980 with the start of the renovation of the historic Wayne Hotel, which is at the bottom of the pictures there. We currently own 17 properties in the township, including 2 of the properties on the main corners of Wayne and Lancaster Avenue. In the lower right, you can see where the Rosemont Business Campus is that we own. And we also own the Wayne Theater. We were lucky enough to save that from repurpose in 1996. And hopefully we can save it again and find a movie operator, but that's probably another story for another day. In addition to the properties we own, Steve Bages is here. He's been my mentor for 28 years. He was a member of the 2003 Comprehensive Plan Committee that I found ironic that you were pitching for the 2024 Comprehensive Plan. He helped negotiate the parking lot lease for the AT&T, which allowed a lot of restaurants to go into North Wayne Avenue by renting those spaces when you weren't allowed to put that use in the center of town. Shortly after that, Steve and Mac McCoy were then tasked by Clint Stunnebeck to handle the Radnor Gateway Enhancement Committee. If you don't know, some of the things that came out of that were the walkway across North Wayne Avenue, the clock at the corner of South Wayne and Lancaster, the corner street improvements, and other streetscape improvements. We've participated on various boards, including the development of the WBOD district. Steve served as chairman of the Mainline Chamber, and he also spent a lot of time with Surrey Services, finding their new home, and they were able to help a lot of the elderly people in our community. I feel confident we've been greatly contributed to this area, and we wouldn't be doing this project if we didn't think it would be a successful venture and an asset to our community. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Birch. Really appreciate the walk and really appreciate the presentation. Just for context purposes, you were here in October. The project has changed a little bit. And I think you've addressed some of the parking concerns we had. That being said, could you just tell us what changed between, just for the record, between the October plan and the plan that you're presenting today?
The plan is similar. What you'll see on this plan that the engineers can answer, one of the big questions was stormwater. We were proposing to change some things around, and the township code had changed to where you couldn't just swap impervious for impervious. So in that change, you had to go back and treat everything as if it was a meadow. So we've gone back and we're now proposing to add stormwater to take care of this entire area. The other side of it is the parking requirement. I think when I was up here last time going through the analysis, and I think you had asked me, am I looking for a permanent use or is this an accessory use? And I think a light went off that this is really an accessory use to the main interior use. So I think that's really the change here, to understand that everything outside is conditional upon the weather. If the weather is nice, we can have the function. If not, it has to come inside. So in a combination of understanding the parking, presenting that the right way, and then doing the stormwater management portion of it, I think we've complied with most of the comments from the engineer's comments.
Sure, and I think also stating for the record, our intention was to just determine whether you needed zoning relief or not. Yes. And at the last presentation, we felt that you probably needed to take a look at that again. With respect to the structures, obviously the open air tent is not for year-round use.
Correct.
Just out of curiosity, is the conservatory a 3-season, 4-season? What's your sense of that?
I don't think it's a 3-season, no, because the roof structure itself, it's not insulated. There's nothing insulated on these walls. It's a much nicer tent made out of metal and in plexiglass. So it's probably 2.5 seasons of use. I would say that.
It appears that your parking schedule complies, certainly by my read of the consultant's letters. There wasn't a lot of objection. However, our our parking standards, especially for a property like yours. Maybe you're overparked, maybe you're under, but in the eventuality that you require more parking for a particular event, for this particular property, do you have an overflow parking plan, and what would that look like?
We do not right now. We've owned the property since 1990. I would say we've probably seen most of the events, different political events where there wouldn't be a single table and there'd be nothing but standing room only. And if there was, I don't know everyone here, I don't think there's ever been a complaint about parking going on to the adjacent roadways. I think if we ever saw that come to fruition, that if it was successful enough and that was required, I would tend to think we could probably talk to Radnor Financial Center. There's some areas in there where they have dead-end parking that I know they don't even use because the way their new roadway kind of S's in there. We would probably seek out that way. They would do something on a shared parking, employee parking type of thing, but we could rent spaces from there. We would seek that out.
Sure. And also, there's very little chance of spillover to the adjacent neighborhood. There's no street parking allowed either on Lancaster Ave where you sit or Radnor Chester Road. My main concern was for Brandywine. And I also realized that the lot sits in a sea of parking, yes, but most of it you don't own.
And then remember too, on the weekend of where, if there was a big event here, the way the parking calculation works, there's 63 parking spaces assigned to the office space. They would all be free on a Friday or probably all day Saturday and Saturday evening. That's the unique thing of there's so many uses and so many calculations on here that there's always free parking from one of the uses not being in use at that point in time. And the same thing with any business meeting. If it's a multiple day business meeting, they're typically staying in the hotel rooms. Those are being double counted between the banquet room and the hotel rooms, but they're added individually in this scenario. But again, I think there's always going to be enough. And even when we got the variances back in, I'm going to say 1998, we had to do some setbacks. Some of the parking is in the front yard. Those variances were granted. He said, why do you need so much parking? We said, we just want to have it just in case.
With respect to the three waivers, so you're asking for this to be a preliminary and final plan?
Yes.
Okay. With respect to the third waiver, the request to waive the streetlight requirement, can you just speak a little bit about that?
How you doing? Dave Porter, Herbert McCombie's office. So with respect to the third waiver, the existing condition is that there are existing streetlights on, I believe, Lancaster Avenue and Radnor Chester Road. So the request is that they be considered in lieu of providing additional street lighting.
Okay, thank you. One final question for me. So with respect to the Gannett Fleming saldo comment on Chapter 255, 43.1 B2, you're proposing to pay a fee in lieu, right? You're not dedicating land for park and recreational use, right?
Yes.
Okay, got it. All right. All right, commissioners, questions?
I have a question. First of all, thank you for just the commitment and your investment into Radnor. And I'm coming around to this. I think it's making sure that your ability to host these large events and this type, I think it's the experiential market is growing and it's continuing to grow. There's a lot of pent-up demand from COVID, and I think moving forward, I think this type of experience is what people want, and it will activate our town, activate our downtown, and all of that. My question has to do with, and I think your argument is that this is an accessory structure. This is not a permanent structure. Would it be subject to all the code and life safety standards that we require our permanent structures to be adhered to? Because I'm concerned about storm, winds, fire, you know, just weather, you know, like what is that sail structure? Is it taken down during the off-season?
It is taken down during the off-season, yes.
Okay.
And also, the way that that material is, you would have to get a maintenance contract every 6 weeks or so to come out. It collects the dust and the grit from the road. It will collect up dirt. They come out, they clean it. They recheck the attachments to the ground of how they secure that down. So it's not just their own staff looking at it. I've inquired on myself to understand. That's why I knew about the vinyl structures. But they do come out and they take a look at it. They tighten up the straps and make sure it's safe. Now, at the same time, I would tend to think if you had a high wind event coming through, that'd probably be a time when, hey, we'd like to have it outside. This has to move inside because the winds are over some threshold. They would recommend not to use it. The one good thing is you're a little protected by the hotel structure. I think it's going to be one of those wait and see how everything reacts with the environment and not the weather and how that tent structure works. If the wind is sheltered, if the tent is sheltered by the wind by the hotel structure itself too. The other temporary structure, I don't think there'll be any worry. I would see in the wintertime, they probably would collapse that so there's no weight of the snow sitting on that. But I'm sure there's still some type of maintenance for that.
So just one more follow-up is that when this is approved or when this gets going, could you submit the specifications and the maintenance schedule to the Radnor Police and Fire so that they have that on record as well, so they know how to?
Sure, we could do that.
Okay.
Yeah, just going on to your point that you raised, my only concern is the wind, because it's becoming more and more violent with each passing year that, and particularly your location, there's no trees around there, so it can be fairly windy right there because of it's just coming the way the breezes go during the storms. So if you do, I'm actually kind of curious for my own education, if you do know of a storm that's coming through and just say it's going to be a bad one, right? How quickly would you anticipate you take that tent down or collapse it, partially collapse it?
It was recommended not to have the staff take it down. I would have to find out about it.
Okay.
The further we got into it, it's a very expensive tent. I think that's why you pay the maintenance to come out and check it and retie those straps down. But they tell you when you talk to them, it does okay in the wind. I agree with you. I'd be curious to see how it is to make sure nothing happened to anyone around. But I think that would be an instance where if you knew that was coming through, if you knew there was a straight line thunderstorm coming through, that event would be held indoors that night.
Mm-hmm. And what's the maximum height of the tent? No, the
26 feet is the top of the post.
top of the post, okay.
Mr. Birch, I just want to correct one thing. There are trees that surround
Yes.
this courtyard, right?
Yeah.
And how tall are they approximately?
I'd say it's at least 20 feet. That's the rear view of the pine trees now.
So the visibility of this tent is minimal.
Yes.
Okay.
On the right-hand side, the brown structure, that's a two-story structure about 16 feet tall.
Okay. Any other commissioner comment? All right. Let's hear from the staff. Mr. Phillips.
Once again, you covered a lot of the items that were in my letter already, and I've had some conversations with the engineer, and I believe everything will comply on the drawing comments that we mentioned.
Okay. How about Mr. Drummond?
We had no additional comments on this one. This is pretty clean from a traffic standpoint.
All right. Got it. All right. I'm going to construct a motion in the matter of land development application. Oh, I'm sorry. We didn't hear from the public, if there's any public comment. Not seeing any. Okay. Let me take another pass at this. Let me construct a motion. The matter of land development application 21033, 579 Lancaster Avenue, aka Radnor Hotel. I am making a motion to recommend approval, subject to will comply to the consultant's letters, granting the 3 waivers in their entirety. Can I get a second? Second by Brubaker. And all in favor?
Aye. Somebody poke Mike.
Can you tap Mr. Commissioner Lahota? All right. 6 with Lahota abstaining. Okay, thank you, and good luck.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you for coming. We do have some new business. So as I mentioned earlier today, as well as during our prior meetings, Radnor is undergoing a comprehensive land use plan review. And we're fortunate to have FHI Studios to guide us through that process. By the way, the comprehensive land use plan isn't a document that mysteriously appears. We hire a consultant, they produce a plan. No, it's actually a document that primarily takes a lot of input from our citizens. And as part of that, FHI Studios conducted a virtual community survey. They did it on our website that was devoted to that purpose, radnor2035.com. This survey has now been concluded. FHI Studios did make the presentation of that survey to the Comprehensive Land Use Plan Steering Committee on February 20th. They also came in front of the Board of Commissioners on February 26th. Now, Adam Texa from FHI Studios is in front of us. Tonight's a special treat. Not only do we get to hear about the results of the survey, but we also get to have an informal Q&A as well, which the Board of Commissioners did not get to. By the way, if you're watching from home, you want to take a deeper dive into this, the results of the survey are on the website, radnor2035.com. You'll also find the soft copy of the presentation there, as well as the audio. And while you're there, just submit your name, your email address, and click the Contact Us box so that you can get updates on our work. And lastly, this is a very long lead-in, I apologize. On April 1st, they'll be back in front of us again, FHI Studios. They'll be discussing existing conditions and major trends affecting Radnor since the last comp plan was done in 2003. Mr. Texa, you're up.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful introduction. Is this picking me up okay? Yep, great.
If you would prefer handheld, it's up to you.
No, I'll use this as long as it's picking me up. So I wanted to start by just saying thank you for the opportunity to come and give this presentation. I met a couple of you out and about as part of our sort of pop-up events. I do want to make sure that we have some time at the end of this to sort of have a conversation and answer any questions. As the Planning Commission, I think all of you play a really important role in this process. I would also like to reserve just a little bit of time at the end of this to talk about the trends and conditions report and what's going to work best for you all, because I am scheduled to come back here, but that's likely going to be a pretty lengthy presentation, and I want to make sure we can talk about that as well. So why don't I get into the presentation and then we can have that conversation. Is that great? So quick overview and introduction. I am Adam Texa. I'm the project manager for FHI Studio on this. What I'm going to do is give a presentation today on the online engagement survey. We did a lot of engagement to promote this survey. So we had posters and bookmarks and flyers. We sent about 5,000 every door direct mailers to certain addresses in the community, really targeting areas with sort of lower income households who typically don't participate as much in this process because they're typically less connected into sort of the communication networks of their communities. There were news articles about it, there were social media posts, there were e-blasts that went out, so a lot of promotion. And we were also out in the community. So we were at the Unity in the Community event, the Pumpkin Fest, the Fall Fest, all talking with people, explaining the comprehensive plan and trying to get people to understand the importance of participating in it. And the results were great. We had 506 responses to the survey. That is really good for a community the size of Radnor. In total, we had about 3,650 comments. I thought it was really interesting, this is just a side note, that the average comment was 34 words or 200 characters, 203 characters. So we got basically 3,650 tweets from people out there. I don't know what we're calling them these days, posts, X's. But we got them and we digested them and we ran through them. And what I'm going to do is sort of present a summary of that. Our participation was really good across the board. Obviously, most people who participated lived here, but a lot of people who shop here, play here, work here, go to school here, and a few people who actually own a business here, which was great to see. The age demographics were pretty representative of what you'd expect from a survey. So what you see here are comparisons of Radnor's population to the survey respondents. I always like to remind people that there are not a lot of 10-year-olds who are taking this survey, and so they're obviously going to skew a little bit older, but really great to see a lot of people in those sort of 25 to 75 and older. Another thing to remember is that group of 19 to 24-year-olds also very much represents a lot of your college-age students who are counted within the census as living in Radnor. A good diversity of people who've lived in Radnor for 2 years all the way up to 22 or more years, and a reasonable representation of incomes and household incomes. I will say that we were sort of overrepresented in households making more than $200,000, and we did not capture, I think, enough of the households making less than $50,000. These are typically households that are very difficult to engage with. And one of the things that we are going to do is work with the steering committee more directly in the sort of next engagement effort to try to really target those households and make sure they get involved in the process. I'm really open to thoughts and ideas that you all might have about how we could better do that. Just a great map of where everybody said that they lived in the community, a really broad participation level. I always think it's important to remember that some of those areas are just denser places that people live. So some of the key takeaways, kind of top level takeaways. First and foremost, I do think it's really important to acknowledge that people love Radnor. People love living in this community. There are some really cherished assets here. The senior center, the library, your sports fields, your trails and open spaces. These are the things that really come to top of mind for people when they think about what they love about this community. Preservation is a core community value here. People want to see historic structures, natural environments, and open spaces preserved. There is some concern about overdevelopment. We heard that throughout the survey. And a desire for equitable housing solutions that really attract a diverse demographic, and support existing populations. A lot of concerns about pedestrian connectivity, bicycle connectivity. That was something that just came up over and over again. A desire to address traffic congestion. As I say, this is Radnor, so you can't talk about anything without talking about stormwater. Proven again tonight is a really critical issue. And one thing that I thought was interesting or important to note is this question of sustainability really came out in a lot of the comments, something that wasn't specifically addressed in your last comprehensive plan nearly 20 years ago. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to summarize the findings from these three sort of question ideas, which were priority topics, big ideas, and issue mapping. So just a reminder of what these survey questions looked like. For priority topics, we gave people 14 topics. They had to pick their three most important ones, put those into an order of priority, and then they were able to give open-ended responses about why those were important to them. Big ideas, they were able to share their one policy project or program and then like other people's responses. And then people were able to drop a pin on a map to talk about where there were specific issues and then give sort of open-ended explanations about what the issues were and then tag those issues with a series of sort of themes like walkability, or excuse me, like mobility or development or design. So the top priority of participants, I think it's really important to acknowledge that there wasn't one theme that just sort of was overwhelmingly identified as a priority or an issue for a large majority of people. There was a lot of diversity of opinions here, but you can see that sort of open space trails and recreation, neighborhood conservation, and environmental protection were themes that at least 1 in 3 participants identified as their first, second, or third priority. However, when we started to sort of condense these themes down in and around the theme or the chapters of your comprehensive plan, it became really clear that housing was just a key issue. And that environment and natural resources, business and economic development, mobility and open space all sort of rose to those really top-level concerns that people had. The only thing that I think really jumped out at us a little bit was that not a lot of people really responded to institutional relations as a core topic that they had a lot of concern about. So I'm going to go through each of those topic areas and just give a summary of what we found. So for housing and affordable housing specifically, there's a lot of concern among some residents about the impact of changing housing prices on the community. There are people who are feeling like they're getting pushed out or they've seen people get pushed out. They're seeing this as something that's particularly impacting young and older residents. That they see this as a potential threat to the economic and social diversity of your community. And there's some concern out there that this is impacting the ability of businesses in Radnor to sort of maintain a workforce that can be supported in this community. I will say, I've put in some example quotes here. I'm not going to go through and read all of those quotes. But if you're going back and looking through this presentation, I think they really help to illustrate a lot of the ideas that we're talking about here. In terms of housing diversity, these are sort of very similar themes to the affordable housing thing, but a desire to see expanded housing options, a desire to sort of balance market rate, rental and ownership housing. Again, this sort of question about aging population, where are people going to downsize into after they move out of their bigger single-family home? And just a sense that there's a need for a more variety of housing options in the community to support sort of different changing needs of the population. And then neighborhood conservation. So this is that idea of overdevelopment. There is a desire to preserve existing homes and prevent scrapes. And this sort of overdevelopment is tied to a little bit of a sense of overcrowding, a feeling like it's affecting the aesthetics of existing established neighborhoods, and that it's affecting affordability again, and that there's this, there's a sort of sense that it's also tied to a topic that we'll get into a little bit, which is open space and the loss of open space in the community. So when we ask people to suggest a policy or project, a lot of people brought out this idea or liked an idea around sort of more stringent control. So whether that is changes to zoning or better enforcement of zoning, restricting where development could occur, addressing things more specifically like steep slopes, bringing in building and design standards into your ordinance. All of these were sort of suggested as ways of addressing some of this overdevelopment that people are seeing. And when we ask people to draw up maps about the housing issues, these are some of the hot spots that you can see throughout the community. Those topics, once we started drilling down into like specific local issues, people were talking around issues with vacancy in some places, property maintenance issue, people identifying locations where they wanted to see more affordability or targeting areas where they saw overdevelopment happening, as well as sort of areas where they'd like to see overdevelopment. So I will just recognize, I'm going to go through all of these and then we'll sort of stop to have the conversation, and I apologize in advance for all the talking that I'm going to be doing here. So in terms of environment and natural resources, stormwater management is obviously a real concern. We group these concerns into a couple of sort of themes. One is this idea of disruption and damage. People feeling like, hey, when we have stormwater issues, when we have flooding happens, we basically have to stop everything and we have to focus on this issue, and that's really disruptive to our lives. But there's also a sense of the cost of this. And I will say that there were some comments here sort of with a sentiment like, I'm paying the stormwater management sort of fee, and I'm sinking money into my home in order to address these issues, feeling like it's a real financial burden on some people in the community. And then a recognition that there's some contributing factors to these flooding issues, one of them being sort of excessive paving, especially related to parking. That sort of comment at the bottom, too much paving eliminates thousands of acres which could absorb water and rejuvenate landscapes. So real understanding of the connection between certain development policies and the impacts of them. Environmental protection, again going back to this idea that open space is a theme or an idea that people hold really closely when they think of Radnor. There are a lot of people who wanted to see as much open space preserved as possible, lamenting the loss of sort of existing open space to development, and the impacts of loss of trees on the community. And that's one thing that we saw over and over and over again in these particular sets of comments was the tree question. And I know obviously that was even a topic that you addressed today, so I know you all are very well aware of that. With respect to business and economic development, I think it's really important to acknowledge that people see business as part and parcel of what Radnor is. There isn't a sense in the comments that we got that businesses and economic development are somehow separate or apart from the core qualities of what make Radnor Radnor. There was a sense that there was a lack of support for some businesses, especially sort of in the Wayne areas, some concern about vacant storefronts, again, in Wayne, a desire to really enhance vibrancy and the opportunities in commercial spaces, and a little bit of a recognition through different comments that the business base in Radnor is part of what supports your tax base, and therefore is a really important thing to pay attention to in these long-range comprehensive planning work. When we asked people for their ideas, there was a lot of support, which I thought was interesting, for zoning. Congratulations, you have a lot of zoning hawks out there in your community who are saying you need better building and design standards, you need to update your zoning regulations in order to better get the outcomes that they would like to see in the community. So 52 people liked a comment about better building and design standards, 42 people liked this idea of sort of updating zoning. Mobility issues. Non-motorized mobility was something that we heard of across, a variety of different comments, with a real emphasis on walkability. I think people would like to bike around Radnor. People would like to have better bike access to different destinations. But a big part of this is about the walking connectivity in the community. And I think it's also important to recognize that the comments we got were not just focused on new sidewalks. There was concern about sort of the condition and the safety of your existing sidewalk network. And a fair recognition here that enhanced non-motorized mobility options, walking, biking, taking transit, is good for both personal and environmental health. So, not surprising, we got a lot of ideas, people just saying, more bike lanes, more sidewalks, and lots of people liked those ideas. Lots of people supported that approach. Traffic and parking is something that people care about and is something that they want to see addressed. One thing that I thought was interesting, again, is the sense that people understood there's a connection between infrastructure and land planning, and a desire to see a little bit more closer coordination between those two things. A recognition that all the traffic and the parking is having an environmental impact, a sense that there isn't sufficient parking in certain locations. Probably not reflected here enough is also a feeling like there's too much parking in other locations. And then some specific issues around some of the parking kiosks and handicap access, especially in Wayne. Not surprisingly, when we asked people to identify where there were mobility issues, sort of locational problems, a lot of it fell on Conestoga Road and the Route 30 corridor. In terms of open space trails and recreation, people really saw outdoor spaces as core to being part of their personal health and well-being, and a real desire to see an expanded trail network throughout the community, something that I think you all have done a very good job with your open space and trail plan. People want to see policies changes, so they want to see protection of open spaces. Again, they want to see trees planted, and they want to see protection of existing trees. And there were lots of suggestions here about different ideas around incentives, regulations, better enforcement, all sort of pointing to this idea of you can do a better job of maintaining and protecting your open space network. So when we asked people where those issues were, people really focus on underutilized spaces. A lot of when we got into the nitty-gritty of locational issues, lack of maintenance or erosion of quality, a desire to sort of see improved plantings, and then obviously stormwater issues being a real issue. With respect to historic preservation, there is a strong sense that Radnor's historic assets really connected to its past and helped tell its story. I thought it was interesting to see here that the historic quality is part of its identity, but people also talked about this as a kind of protection against some of the development changes that have been happening, in a sense that if you do a good job protecting your historic assets, it helps to sort of maintain your community over time and allows you to grow and change in other areas and in other places. So I thought that was really interesting. But also concerns about some of the, we did see the McMansionization topic come up here and some of the concerns about, what is happening to our community. Again, one of the new topics that we think came up in part of this was sustainability and climate change. And the comments across the board in this category really focused on the urgency of this issue, a sense that you can't just kick the can down the road a little bit, that these are topics that need to be addressed now, and a real sense that is tied to some of these, severe climate and weather risks, the changing global environment and the carbon footprint of the community, and some anxiety there around the future of what Radnor will be for future generations. The community resources, I started off with this. I think we heard over and over again that these are some of the core assets that people really identify with and sort of feel like these are what make Radnor Radnor. So the library, the senior center, the sports facilities, they're just really important to people, and they want to continue to see them thrive. So I also like this first comment here, just that top quality facilities sort of bring in top talent, bring in people into this community, which then brings a sort of positive feedback loop. Those people then support the community, which then strengthens those institutions and facilities, which then builds on itself. So I thought that was a really insightful comment here. Institutional relations was only identified as a priority for 3% of participants. Those that did see it had some concerns about taxes, a sort of feeling like those institutions aren't paying taxes but are receiving benefits, but also some questions about sort of student populations and the impact that they're having on the community. There was sort of a topic that we don't normally start off with because it's usually not something that a lot of sort of general public bring attention to, but there were a lot of big ideas around zoning updates and enforcement. And so I think you have a constituency here in the public who is recognizing that there's a disconnect between your ordinances and your regulations and what they want to see and likely what you all want to see as well. And then underground utilities and getting utilities underground. It was the number one comment here. 71 likes was a sense of, we need to get those utilities underground. I know there's a lot of issues with that, but I think it's an important topic that wasn't specifically addressed in your last comprehensive plan. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about places. So as a reminder about this question, we gave people about 5 places, and we asked what they wanted to see happen there. Did they want to see them preserved, enhanced, evolved, or transformed? Or were they indifferent to change there? Did they just not care? Or were they unsure? So these were those 5 places: the I-476 interchange, the Radnor Financial Center, Conestoga Business District, the Wayne Business District, and Lancaster Avenue. One thing that I think is important to recognize across all of these is you're not looking at a lot of people who want to substantially transform Radnor, right? I don't think that's going to be a big surprise to you all. But what I do think is interesting, you can see across all of this, is there is a fair amount of, especially sort of in the Wayne Business District and the Lancaster Avenue corridor, a desire to see more evolution and enhancements. So that indicates to us that they're not places that people think are sort of hunky-dory and that you can just kind of keep doing what you're doing there, that something needs to change in those areas. In the Wayne Business District, people do see this as an economic and social center of the community, but they do want to see it enhanced and evolved into more of a hub where sort of businesses and residents can thrive and come together. There was concern about vacancies. There was a desire for improved streetscapes and new green spaces, more pedestrian enhancements and traffic calming, addressing parking, encouraging more diverse businesses, zoning and infrastructure improvements. Again, not with this idea of substantially, transforming and making Wayne into something that it's not right now, but certainly making enhancements and improvements to that area to sort of reinforce it. I do think that it's important to recognize that when we ask people to map where there were issues, this is a heat map of all the pins related to all the things that people dropped on it. There's a big, bright red spot around Wayne. I think that is an issue that just sort of resonates across lots of people, and because it's such an important part of your community, it's sort of a central hub for where people come together. That's not a surprise, but I do think it's worth paying attention The I-476 interchange, just a real desire to see improved landscaping, addressing some of the congestion, traffic control issues through there. But, you know, it's mostly around aesthetics and sustainability there rather than, you know, redevelopment of that area. The Conestoga Road Business District, I know this is a topic that has come up a lot, this sort of Garrett Hale Business District, is, you know, people want to see it be vibrant and have, you know, local businesses. They want to see some transportation improvements, some traffic improvements, but there also is a recognition that there's a need to sort of blend residential and commercial spaces, and that those situations sit very close to one another in that area. So the impact of commercial businesses on the residential surrounding area is maybe a little bit more acute there. Along the Lancaster Avenue corridor, just a general desire to improve traffic flow, maybe strike a little bit better balance between some of the commercial and residential spaces, improving landscaping. I would say that this is the area where people express the most dissatisfaction about sort of how things are and where things were, especially as I would assume is not a surprise to you all around some of the traffic issues. The Radnor Financial Center I thought was really interesting. People really see this area as big empty parking lots. Whether that's true or not, you know, what the sort of perception of it is sort of that. And there's a real desire to bring more activity and green spaces into that area. Going back to this was also an area where we saw a lot of indifference, though. There were a lot of people who just said, I don't know, or I don't care what happens there. So I thought that was kind of interesting, especially given all the news about office spaces and the changing office environment. I think it is going to be worthwhile to have engaged people in sort of education around these spaces on all sides of it. But the people who did submit ideas were thinking big here. Like, people were talking about this could be a new town center. Like, let's bring in new mixed-use housing. Let's build an art center, like a performing venue. Like, let's create big, you know, more green spaces. Like, people were thinking rather big in their comments around what this place could be. So I thought that was sort of interesting. So with that, I'm going to pause, take a drink of water, and I am very happy to engage in questions and comments going forward.
So thank you for that thoughtful presentation, and obviously this was a very large body of work involving a very comprehensive survey process as well as outreach.
Yeah.
Obviously, it is concerning that the subset of residents that we were able to reach don't perfectly reflect the residents of the township, but
Yeah.
in this case, we have 506 responses, I believe, and that should be statistically relevant for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's important to remember that we're not trying to predict the next president of the United States here, right? What we are trying to do is get a temperature of what some of the issues are. And in some ways, what I would, you know, am looking for you all to give some input on is, does this feel right? Based on your experience in this community, in hearing all the applications that you do, in talking with your neighbors, are we kind of on the right path here? Or is there something that we're missing or need to be engaged in a little bit? And I'm going to just do, real quickly, I'm going to grab my notebook so I can take some notes on this.
Sure. Just, you know, a little bit of discussion amongst the commissioners here. What stood out to me after the third listen of this is there's some major conflicting priorities, certainly around housing. And just for greater context, if you look at the main line as a whole, Radnor has probably the largest percentage of rental housing out of most communities as a percentage. I think we...
Did you get a sneak peek of my trends and existing conditions
No,
report? That's accurate.
No, I read the prior comp plan,
There you
which
go.
I recommend that all of us do the same. And my recollection of it was that I think we're somewhere in the 31st percentile.
Yep. Yeah, you've got about 33% of households are renters, 34, something like that, which you're higher than the county as a whole, and you're higher than your sort of surrounding neighbors.
Yeah, and as somebody who works in a subsection of multifamily, that's a very large percentage, number one. And if you look at this multifamily housing that we have here, it really appears on the surface of it to touch all cross sections. We have luxury rentals, and we have not so luxury rentals, shall we say. So this survey wanted for some additional questions, perhaps with respect to housing affordability. Are we talking about rental housing affordability? Are we talking about purchase? Traditionally, the way I view housing is if you can't afford to purchase, you rent, and that provides a pathway that's less costly and perhaps attracts a larger cross-section of society. Can you comment on that, and maybe we should be asking additional questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be something that we're going to need to explore as part of this process of like, what are we talking about here, and digging into this a little bit more. I mean, I will tell you, we're in the process of developing our trends and conditions report, and there is a significant portion of Radnor who are what are called cost burden, which means they're spending more than 30% of their income on housing and housing-related expenses. So I think sometimes when we think about affordable housing, we tend to think about low and moderate income housing. That's not the case here. We are talking about people who are making your median income, about $150,000 a year, who are likely struggling with some of these like housing cost issues. So, I think we need to work on that and sort of define what are we talking about, what are the goals around that. I mean, and I'm looking for your input on that a little bit here about what are we trying to achieve with
But
this?
with what you're, excuse me, with what you're talking about, it still doesn't really address economic diversity. If you're talking about only for people that have, who make north of 150, but yet they're spending half of their income on maintaining their expensive house.
Yeah.
What about the idea of like, well, if you're talking about the housing stock of 33% is rental property, how much of that is HUD vouched?
Very, very little.
So,
Like
so please let me finish. So if you're talking about diversity within the community, if there's this one thing as a goal that Radnor wants to do, there's a whole nother economic end of the spectrum that that should be addressed.
Yeah, I think that this, in all due respect to the chairperson, like I think that setting this up as a like a duality or sort of like conflicting misses a little bit of the fact that there are like lots of overlapping concerns and issues here. So there are concerns from what we can tell, there are concerns from people who feel like the housing prices are changing and that what they would consider as sort of your typical or your normal Radnor resident is getting pushed out. And they're getting replaced by like higher income households, okay? So there's like that group that's concerned about it. And they're sort of saying like, that's an issue around the community, but it's particularly bad for younger residents and older residents. That they're the groups that are struggling most. Now, I want to be really clear. This is all perception. Yeah. This is all response to the survey. There's another group of people who are saying, and there's an overlap here, that it is important to maintain some economic diversity. And that low and moderate income households are either not accommodated or need to be accommodated there. Then there's like a third group of people who are basically saying like, I can't get the housing that I want here. There's not the form or the condition or the tenure rental versus ownership in Radnor that I don't get the options that I have. And those are playing in a lot of different dynamics.
I agree with what our chairman was saying,
Yeah.
because if you look at the data,
Yeah.
right, it's conflicted. So if you're saying we want a more economically diverse, more diverse housing options, how do you do that in a community where most of the open space is already spoken for?
Right.
Most of the homes are older in nature to a certain extent. You know, I'm one
Yep.
of the older people that probably on this board, been living around here for
Yep.
way too long. And so the houses are being knocked down. But without the progress, without some of the stuff we were talking about today, you're not going to have an option. There's not an option of having that, that variety.
Yeah, and I think that that's a little bit of where we need to start with is sort of establishing what the goals are. And I would argue that there are a lot of creative solutions out there for you to, chip away and work on some of these issues in different ways. And a little bit depending on what your goals are. And I would sort of reserve a little bit your opinions about the goals until you see the data. Because the other thing that I will just be like, I'll forecast it right now, you've lost significant low or sort of moderate income households. You've become significantly wealthier and outpaced your neighboring communities. And a lot of that has been the result, I think, of, the housing costs has driven some of those changes. So the Radnor that was the population that was in Radnor in 2003 is not the population of Radnor in 2024, if that makes sense.
No, it totally makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, my family's been living here since the mid-1960s.
Yeah.
So there was a solid working class area of this town. There was solid lower class areas of this town when I was a kid growing up here. And and also you had some wealthier families.
Mhm.
But I would agree, this town has completely changed from the 70s to when I moved back here into the early 2000s. It's a whole different town.
Yeah.
I have sort of a counterflow question.
Yeah.
So when I read the old comprehensive plan,
Yeah.
The thing that I was most struck by was there was no actionable plan in the comprehensive plan. So there's all this stuff, but there's no like, well, we need to do these 20 things. How do we do this? Like
Yeah.
specifically, how do we do this?
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. The zoning code is old here. It needs to be rewritten.
Yeah.
And everyone knew that in 2003. It was old in 2003. So it was like, but no one said rewrite the zoning code.
Yeah.
So, and I don't mean to be jumping to conclusions here, but all I'm saying is that if people knew that there was going to be an action plan at the end of this process, you might get more buy-in.
Yeah, I mean, I have my own thoughts about the last comprehensive plan. You have an implementation plan that's part of that. It is very different than the writing of the main body of the plan. Just the style and the nature is very different. The format, the level of detail is very different. And I think a question that I've got for you all, and we're going to have with the Board of Commissioners, is kind of what kind of plan you want. These comprehensive plans can be, as you know, very visionary and sort of establish a sense of, this is a direction we're going to go, and then give broad framework for how you go about it. They can get really detailed. I would argue that your current plan has got way too much stuff down here in the weeds, sort of day-to-day stuff, and not enough like, we need to address these 5 big topics. Here's how we're going to go about doing it, and here's some direction for going about it. So yeah, I would agree with you.
Actually, you mentioned everything that were on the top of everyone's list. So what are some of the ideas that people just completely dismissed, saying it's not important at all?
you know, we didn't really get into like taking things off the table at this point. This was really just sort of where are people at. I would say like the big thing that kind of jumped out at me is like I would have expected more comments about all your institutional users. Like coming into it, typically you've got town gown relationships, you got a lot of complaints about students. You know, I work up in Fairfield in Connecticut, they've got Fairfield University, the students are out on the beach, they're getting drunk, they're parking everywhere. I didn't see a lot of those comments, and we got comments from people who live in and around those, like, you know, your institutions. So that was just a little surprising for me. I don't think that that means that it's not an issue for some people, but it didn't rise to the same level of concern in the way that like Wayne really just came across in so many comments as being like a core issue or concern for people.
Adam, thank you for that excellent presentation. Did you hear any comments about the impact of COVID?
You know, really, no. It was surprising. I don't think actually, I'd have to go back and look, but I didn't really see anything. We didn't ask a lot about COVID with the sort of sense that some of that would come out in the data, and we're in a little bit of a post-COVID world, I guess. I will say that, you know, when we looked at your commuting data, you've had a huge jump, obviously, in people who work from home. And that is going to have an impact. I guess I'm giving away all the good secrets from my existing conditions presentation, but interestingly, that seems to have mostly eaten away from the people who drove to work alone. And the only thing that I can assume is that a lot of those people, because about 25% of people who live in Radnor and work somewhere else work in Philadelphia, and that they were stuck driving, you know, 76 into the city every day, and they were like, I'm not doing that anymore. That's sort of my assumption there. But we didn't really hear a lot of people say, hey, this needs to be different because of COVID.
Yeah, I wonder if some of those housing conversations relates to COVID. Just personally, I know some neighbors who've moved here as a result of COVID, just away from the urban centers, sometimes from out of state. I also wonder if the reason why parks, recreation, that type of stuff ranks pretty high, maybe as a result of just, I'm losing my mind, I need to have access to some good quality outdoor spaces.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that, you know, we did get to go out to some of the events, you know, that you were having, that you had here, and it does just feel like a central part of Radnor's identity is these like, it's a combination of like the open space, the trees, the recreational opportunities, and just sort of a sense of like it's part of the community. And maybe you all can speak whether that is a sort of post-COVID reality or that was there before, but it was very present in the comments.
One observation I just thought of is that within your data or your response, and by the way, this is excellent. You did excellent.
Thanks.
This is excellent presentation. The schools, the public schools, because you have a huge value prop or proposition here, why people want to move here, particularly the young families, is to put your schools or put the students through the Radnor system. And then some of them opt, basically, you know, take their chips off the table, sell the house, move somewhere else or whatever. But what is the thought or?
Yeah, we're going to dig into it. I mean, we didn't get a lot on like the schools here. I mean, you'll see, I really am giving away all my secrets here. I would, you know, I'm a little surprised, but you know, only 1 in 3 households in Radnor have a person under the age of 18 living in the house. So somebody who's school-aged or soon to be eligible for school age, which means 2/3 of your households don't have any interaction with the school district. And so I do think that the schools are a major driver and one of the reasons why people come into Radnor. But there's got to be some other reasons because their households are sticking around, they like it, like it does exist. So I think that is important.
But can you draw, can you make a conclusion by, if you're looking at that type of statistical data, saying, okay, if it's 1/3, 2/3, so 2/3, let's just make the argument, maybe the demographic is a little bit older. That means this housing stock of the 2/3 is going to be refreshed.
Could be. I mean, they could be. I mean, don't forget you've got a bunch of renters in your community. I mean, Radnor has a lot of assets outside of its schools. You know, you're in a really good geographic location. You've got great access to a lot of job centers throughout the area. You do have, you know, all the amenities along Route 30, both in your community and kind of going up and down the area. You've got open spaces. So, like, I think schools are an important part of the condition in Radnor, but I'm not sure that they're the only thing driving why people come here and want to live here and participate in your community. But there are certainly, I will say this, in the housing conversations, we are hearing people say, I've got this, it's the empty nester problem. I came here, I moved here because of the schools, I spent 15, 20 years, 25 years living in this community, raising my kids. I don't want to go, but where do I go? Right? I got this house, I got empty bedrooms. What do I do with myself right now?
I think it's not so much housing diversity, it's housing mobility that we don't have here.
Yeah.
Just nowhere to move to.
Nowhere to, yeah, and I think in housing diversity, I think it is there's nowhere to move to, and part of the reason there's nowhere to move to is there's no, I mean, it's the missing middle housing problem, right? It's that you've got like housing for a certain demographic and then a housing for another demographic, but just nothing in the middle.
But we're seeing it here on the Planning Commission. I mean, just the 1 year that I've been here, 1 year and a few months, I've seen lot splits, live, work, twins. These are trends, right? Like, no one's building a single McMansion on a giant, well, maybe a few.
Well, we just don't see that here.
Yeah.
Right.
We don't see the tear downs and rebuilds
True.
into larger homes.
But
Valley Forge Military Academy.
That's one there, yeah.
Group.
Well,
Yeah, and-
Ardrossan,
And I do think there's this question, though, of, like, is that, I mean, sort of to your question, like, is that what you want to see, right? A little bit of the question that we are going to be asking here is not big shifts, not like we're turning the Titanic, 180 degrees around. We're generally, probably a bad analogy, I know. I should have picked a different boat. What are the small changes on the edges in the sort of development normal process that you think are going to make changes? And then I am going to be really relying on you all and looking to you all for some direction about where that might happen. Because the other thing that I think is really important to talk about when we're talking about housing is it doesn't have to be everywhere. It doesn't have to be the same approach in every single zone, in every single district, in every single part of your community. You can have different approaches in different areas and what that might look like.
so just going back to the question of what's the age of Radnor?
Yeah.
Apparently on page 7, it's address, and it looks like about half of the township is 24 years and under.
It's all of your college-age students. You have about 8.
No, I'm just saying.
Yeah, you have about
looking
8.
at the population.
You have about 8,000. Yeah, you have about 8,000 people living in what the census calls group homes, which are dormitories for your purposes, which really skews that demographic for you.
So then if you look at the rest of it, you've got a chunk, 17, 18% that are the children.
Yep.
And then you have the people that are, the largest group is in 25 to 54.
Yep.
So it doesn't look like it's an aging population. It looks like it's just a adult population.
Yes, I mean, I would say that, you know, we can look at that a little bit more like trends over time, but, you know, as is typical in many communities, one, it's really important to know these aren't equal intervals, right? So 25 to 54 is a much bigger interval. It's basically your working adult ages. That 55 to 74 is your kind of like soon to retire, just retire group, and your 75-year-old is like, congratulations, you're still kicking and making it. You know, it's all gravy, you know, after you're here. Is that you? So it's a little skewed there. We could do some like population pyramids that give a better representation.
Yeah, I don't know if it's necessary, but it looked like the responses you've received so far, would you say that's about 2% of the adult population?
You know, that's a good question. How many?
I was just going off the census of looking at people that are over 18. Now that's still still mixing in the college.
Are you all
age.
doing what I was about to do? How many people are in Radnor? Is it 33,000? Yeah, yeah. And then if you take out the college age student population, yeah, you're getting a pretty good representation there.
Just to that point, I fall in an odd category. I think at least one or two others do. My children, who went all the way through Radnor schools, twins, are now 19. So they fall into that thing, but they're still very much Radnor and
Yep.
the schools is what brought us to Radnor in the first place, even though we didn't have kids at the time.
Yep.
So I don't think you've got to, I think, account for that and how you're factoring in the schools and the longevity. Because we have no plans, you know, after living here for 20 years, I mean, particularly because, you know, we're fortunate enough to be wedged in behind that huge chunk of open space right on the township line. So we're across the street. There's nowhere in the state you can find a property like we have, you know, with that access. So
Right.
like, we're not going anywhere.
Right.
Our kids, you know, they still want to come back to the area, although I know other people in the same boat who, almost the minute their youngest graduated this past year, they were out of here. So,
Yeah.
I mean, you get kind of that, the both thing, but I think that it lends to why you see the aging and the people don't have a place to sort of switch to.
Yep.
Because they have, you know, raised their families here, and now it's like, so yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I think
To your point, I see, I see this because a lot of my old friends still live here. They never left, or they elected to come back. One of the reasons I have this discussion with my wife all the time because she's from Montclair, New Jersey, and I said, one of the things why people love living in Radnor and as well as elsewhere on the main line is easy.
Yeah.
It's an easy place. You don't need to get on a highway. You don't need to have, like, if you're Southern California, you don't have to talk about the I-5 or whatever the main highway, the 405 24/7, or every conversation as a joke goes.
Yep.
And so go back to your point, it's easy, and it's relatively, for the value that you get here, relative to other communities, is great. And I always thought, and I work in the commercial real estate business, so I had always thought forever the mainline area, including Haverford and elsewhere around in Westchester, is probably one of the best kept secrets in the entire United States. Word is getting out, or has gotten out, but going back to your point, I think it's just a really relatively easy, it's a comfortable place, and it's relatively inexpensive.
Yeah.
Taxes-wise, including.
Yeah, and I mean, I would also add to that list, I mean, the amount of amenities that you're getting, and that's a little bit of your value proposition, right, is there. And, you know, to get back to what you're saying, I think that's a little bit of what you're kind of getting at is there's like a stickiness to housing. There's like a little bit less of like the mobility options here that also make it, you know, difficult. I will say that you do have, and you have had, you know, population turnover. And that is something to pay attention to, is you are having a sort of, reasonable cycle of people coming in, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the sort of trends and conditions. You're skewing a little bit more towards sort of more recent residents into your community, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing or a sign of something to worry about.
Is there a plan to perhaps present the data about how Radnor stacks up to other communities? Because it seems to me, even areas that have been historically ungentrified are facing this and then some.
Yeah.
So there's a whole nationwide trend of gentrification happening.
Yep.
I don't want to call what's happening to Radnor gentrification. However,
I think this is, all right, if you permit me to editorialize for a second, I think that is a little bit of what's going on nationally, and we're going to present this in the existing, it's going on in the region here, is you are starting to get, whether you call it gentrification or people feeling pushed out of really middle income communities because of the housing condition. And so there is a little bit of a question that you've raised here that I do want to make sure we don't forget, which is my trends and conditions report is going to be lengthy. Or my presentation. I've already done it once. If you thought this was long, it's a lot. I am going to be giving it to the Board of Commissioners, and one thing that I would, offer for you all is that we could share that with you all, like we've got it up on the website. You all could take the time to watch that offline, and that we could use this time more as an opportunity to discuss it and to dig into it a little bit more. Is that something that you all would?
Yeah.
Well, what is it? I'm curious. What is the process here? We're talking about some data, right?
Yeah.
Survey.
Yep.
And we're also talking about some very, very big ideas, a lot of diverse ideas.
Yep.
So how do you corral all this to basically put pen to paper?
Yep.
And to put together a plan? And as you had said, with the prior comprehensive plans, it was way much into the weeds, and if I'm reading you right, we need to keep the suggestion is to keep this at more of a macro level.
No, I think the answer is, I keep working the existing conditions. I bring that back here. I quit my job and move out, and I give it over to Wu to finish it up. You all right? No. We're gonna go. Yeah, exactly. We're gonna go through a public engagement process after this. We're still working out the details of what that looks like. It'll be some sort of, opportunity to bring everybody together, to have some conversations about ideas, to get some feedback around those ideas, where we're gonna go. And then we're gonna have to work those ideas. An important part of that is going to be establishing some goals. What direction is it that you all want to go? Is there community support around those goals? And then what are the strategies and recommendations to move that forward? And the way that I think about this and my role is, my job is not to tell you what to become or what you want to be. I'm here to present the findings from the engagement process. I'm here to, summarize existing conditions and trends, give you my professional opinion about some potential goals based on that. But it's really the community's job to say where we're going. And then I'll work with all of you to come up with strategies and recommendations based on my professional experience about how to do that. But I will say, you've got a very educated, involved citizenry in Radnor, and I fully expect them to play an important role in coming up with ideas. We've got 2 high school students on the steering committee who are already putting out, I think, really interesting thoughts and ideas and challenging things, and I anticipate that to kind of continue throughout the process.
I think it sounds like there, even though this survey has concluded, I think there'll be plenty of opportunities for both us and the township residents to continue plugging in. This does seem to be an extended process, and we're thankful that you're a part of it. Commissioners, Unless you have further comment, I'd like to have some parting words for Mr. Texa here.
So can I just make one request? So MJ is your representative on the steering committee. He is the funnel through which sort of everything comes through. So I know, if there are thoughts or ideas or things that you, after digesting this a little bit more, want to continue to communicate to us, you can pass that through MJ, but also through Bill. He'll and Peggy will help sort of communicate that to us. I don't want this to feel like this is your last opportunity to provide thoughts and input. So, thanks.
Yeah, and for the folks listening at home, obviously go to Radnor2035.com. There are ways to engage through that website, as I mentioned previously, and definitely continue contributing to that process. With respect to your suggestion that perhaps we do some homework and listen to your presentation ahead of time, I think that that sounds like a good idea. We're not going to vote on it, but we do have an agenda, and we want to make sure that we give you all the attention that you need by reviewing the Board of Commissioners presentation, as well as come prepared with some questions.
Great. And yeah, and the only thing I will say with that is that sort of existing trends and conditions is our first high-level pass at the data. It kind of gives you the pieces. I fully anticipate that for you all to come out of that saying, like, I want to know more about this topic. Like, we need to dig in more about these questions. It's not the end of our sort of analysis, but it is the sort of end of the, okay, this is a direction we're going, this is a top-level findings. Now what do we need to dig into in more detail? Cool.
And for the record, the steering committee meets next time on March 12th, and I will attend. So, that being said, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you all very much. I really appreciate it. Have a good one.
And I'm going to make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Seconded by Brubaker. All in favor? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you. Good night.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
As an outspoken, one of the issues that single people